In a 13-month period of time from February 1976 to March 1977, 4 children were abducted, held captive, and murdered, leaving their little bodies in various locations all over Oakland County in the state of Michigan. This serial killer is also known as the Oakland County Child Killer, the Babysitter, and the Babysitter Killer. Also, the whole, crime case is considered like the Michigan snow killings. Side note, I literally just moved from there, Oakland County, 6 months ago. Anyway, what is up, you guys? It's Jessi Maee, and welcome back to another true crime video. I hope you guys are enjoying this little series I am doing on my channel. It's seeming to do a little bit better than my building a tiny house. So I definitely will continue building my dream, building the tiny house, but I also will keep posting up some true crime videos, fully at least once a week. This one's a little bit later than a week after the last true crime coverage. It takes a lot. And when you're also building a tiny house, time is, limited. So if you guys enjoy true crime and you enjoy this case coverage, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that little notification bell. And also give the video a thumbs up because it helps me out tremendously, pushes this out into the algorithm. More people can see this true crime case coverage. And maybe also we can, collectively help catch the killer because this one is unsolved. Please kindly and respectfully let me know in the comments if any of the information I have is incorrect and we can have a discussion about it. I mean, absolutely no disrespect when covering these cases. I collected the information from the sources linked below to create this video. Thank you guys for watching. Mark Douglas Stebbins was born on September 13th in 1963 in Royal Oak, Michigan. He was born to Lester and Ruth Stebbins, who later divorced in November of 1968 because of alcoholism, extreme mental cruelty, and physical abuse. Ruth now has full custody of Mark and his younger brother, Mike. Mark was a 7th grader at the Lincoln Junior High School, weighing only at 100 pounds, 4 feet tall, and 8 inches, with strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes. Mark was described as a quiet kid, a loner, but a very good student. On February 15, 1976 at 1:30 p.m., Mark was at the American Legion Hall in Ferndale, Michigan with his mother, where she worked as a bartender/waitress. A couple sources said bartender, a couple said waitress, so maybe she was both. His younger brother, Mike, was also with them. There was a pool tournament going on, and Mark got bored, so he asked his mother if he could have some money to go to the local hobby shop, but she said no since she had already given him his allowance. Not really bothered or upset, he asked his mother if he could walk the 3/4 mile home to watch a movie that was premiering on television. She agreed. Shortly after Mark had left, his little brother, Mike, decided he wanted to head home, and he headed on that same walk that Mark just did. Here's a quote directly from Mike. It was like 40 years later or something. It was like in an interview. Quote from Mike. "I left probably an hour after he did. Maybe if I would have went with him, who's to say? I might have been able to save him because maybe they wouldn't have been looking for 2 kids." That's gotta weigh some, you can't beat yourself up, but that's gotta be heavy on Mike. Knowing, maybe if I went. But who's to say, with knowing what we are about to know, that the killer wouldn't have picked both of them up? There's really no telling what would have happened if Mike would have went with him. Later that night, his mother called home, and Mark's younger brother, Mike, answered the phone and said that Mark never made it. Ruth tried to file a missing persons report, but was told no, that she had to wait at least 24 hours. That was around 9 p.m., and by 11 p.m., when Mark still hasn't returned, she called the Ferndale Police Department demanding that a missing persons report was filed, and one was. It was reported that he was wearing a blue hooded parka, blue jeans with a black belt, black rubber boots, and a red sweatshirt. Since there wasn't a kidnapping in Ferndale in the last 10 years, police ruled out the kidnapping very quickly. They assumed he was just with friends or he ran away. Nonetheless, though, the police did conduct a widespread search of Ferndale, checking almost anywhere that they think that they could, behind dumpsters, in ditches, alleys, the whole 9 yards. Ruth was terrified, staying up all night waiting for her son to come home. A direct quote from her is, "I kept hearing noises and thinking it was Mark. The next few days I sat 3 places at the table and hoped that he would come home." At around 11:45 on February 19th, 1976, Mark's body was found fully clothed, wearing the same thing that he was last seen in a parking lot on 10 Mile Road in Greenfield in Southfield, Michigan. Mark's body had been carefully placed there. He was on his back, slightly on his left side, propped against the brick wall with his legs folded up. Mark had 2 lacerations to the left rear of his head, measuring in 3 centimeters and 4 centimeters. His face was bruised along his eyelids and upper neck. He was also sexually violated. There was light brown discoloration on his wrists and ankles, implying that he had been restrained or tied up. The autopsy showed that the cause of death was asphyxia due to smothering. So some sources, and I read the actual medical autopsy report that was written up and stuff by the medical, like, I tried to find it for all the victims. But a lot of sources were trying to say that he was actually strangled, and that's not necessarily the case. If you read the full autopsy report, it is noted that he had a ligature mark on his neck, but it's also noted that is more than likely just from the jacket being kind of like tied up on him. The examiner said that it was probably due to his jacket and considered to be post-mortem, so it probably happened after he had passed. I did also read in a completely different source, and this was only in one, so take this part with a grain of salt, that all victims had their hoods tied around their neck to keep their heads up. So that could also been possibly part of like the laceration that was on his neck. So take that with a grain of salt, but I highly doubt that he actually was strangled in this situation. I'm taking the examiner's word for this, that he was actually smothered and not like strangled. Mark was held captive before he was murdered, and after he was murdered, his body was cleaned. A lot of sources said his clothes were washed and clean. Upon reading the evidence from the State of Michigan Regional Crime Detection Laboratory report, his jeans and red sweatshirt only appeared to have small stains on them. The sweatshirt had a small amount of blood at the neck, which probably would have been from like the two cuts that was on his head. Is just my personal opinion. That's probably where they came from. The jeans may have picked up some dirt and oil from laying in the parking lot, and the examiner also found red fibers on Mark's body, but they were found to be from the American Legion haul, like they matched the red fibers to something that was in there. The examiner also found rodent and dog hairs on the sweatshirt and the jeans. I don't know which one he actually technically found him on. Both garments were noticeably clean and dressed compared to the rest of his clothing. Also note that Mark's black belt was intact and it was in the normal position. His socks showed normal wear since washing, indicated by the appearance and body odor. It is noted that in his underwear he had urine and fecal stains, but his underwear is also consistent with having been worn for a relatively extended amount of time. And also note that there was no semen found. So upon reading that, I don't think like his underwear was washed. If he's wearing them for an extended amount of time. His t-shirt was soiled, and it suggests that it wasn't washed. It had blood stains present. The stained and the soiled appearance of the presence of the body odor supported this. A man told the police that he was walking his dog in the area around 9:30 in the morning. The dog had a 20-foot leash. The man stated if the boy's body would have been there around that time, his dog would have smelled it out and found it. His dog didn't. So roughly there was about a 2-hour window period to where the killer could have easily dumped the body between 9:30 a.m. and 11:45 a.m. But nobody saw a thing. This was also a very frustrating read because the police missed valuable evidence. They covered up the body with a dirty blanket, which could have been where the hairs were found, because they also found hairs on the blue blanket that they covered up Mark's body with. They moved Mark's body before the medical examiner arrived. His body was taken to the Southfield police station instead of the morgue. In addition, the police removed Mark's clothing, destroying and contaminating any possible evidence. Way to go. A psychiatrist suggested that the police try to lure the killer back to the scene. They did so and placed a child-sized mannequin dressed exactly like Mark and placed it where he was found. Side note, if you didn't watch last week's coverage, the police did this. So, what is with Michigan police using a mannequin to try and lure the killer back? I never have heard of this ever. And all the true crimes that I kind of researched, listened to, or whatever, and now the two that I covered, Michigan, are you okay? I digress. The police returned later to where the mannequin was, only to find a funeral service card from Mark's service. Ruth said, and I quote, "I didn't recognize everyone who came in. I might have even shaken the hands with the killer." That's gotta be heartbreaking and stomach-turning. Mark's mom took a turn for the worse and ended up on welfare, unable to work due to reliving her child's death. Quote, "Every time I see a child has been killed since Mark, it happens to me all over. I still think about it every day." She later passed in 2011, not knowing who had killed her son. Jill Robinson was born on December 2nd in 1964. Jill was from a Catholic family and her parents recently had divorced. They moved from Detroit to Royal Oak to be in a safer neighborhood. Jill is a 6th grader at the Longfellow School in Royal Oak, and she was described as a loner, but a smart and good student. She was a sweet and precious child and mature for her age. A friend of Jill's, Ted Radzinski, said, quote, "She was bright. I suppose she had what you might call a changeable preteen kind of nature." She was the oldest of 3. Jill had 2 younger sisters, Heather and Eileen. Jill had a deep-seated fear of being shot. She would have nightmares that a man was going to shoot her. The fear was so persistent that her parents took her to see a child psychologist. Jill's mom once told her, "I know it's crazy, but it feels like somebody's going to shoot me." On December 22nd, 1976, Jill was not in a good mood. She packed up her denim backpack with makeup and a blanket and hopped on her bike and pedaled down Woodward Avenue after an argument with her mother about helping to make biscuits. Carol said, quote, "Well, Jill, if you don't like being here, why don't you just get your coat and stand out in the front of the yard and think about it? And when you feel like talking about it, come back in." That's when Jill pedaled off. Carol thought maybe she went to her friend's house or to her father's that lived a few miles away since they were divorced. Jill never returned home, and by 11:30 p.m., her father had reported her as missing. Black snow boots and a blue backpack with her makeup, blanket, hairbrush, underwear, and scissors. Jill was reported to have been carrying 2 books that were never found. Her bike was found behind a store located on Main Street in Royal Oak, Michigan the next day. It is unclear if she rode it or if the bike was dumped. On December 26th at 8:45 a.m., Jill's body was found along I-75 in Troy, Michigan, just north of the Big Beaver exit, partly covered in snow and within sight of the Troy Police Department station. One witness came forward to report that a blue Pontiac Lehman's was parked near the victim at around 4:30 a.m. Police never followed up on that lead. Great police work investigation so far in this case. Jill's face was half blown off with a 12-gauge shotgun. The autopsies revealed that she may have died of shock and hemorrhage rather than the wound itself. Unable to make a positive identification visibly, although she was wearing the clothes that matched the missing persons report, it wasn't until a few days later that there was a positive identification through dental records and fingerprints. Investigators found Jill fully clothed with her backpack still on her back and noted that nothing was stolen. Robbery was not the motive, and she had not been sexually violated. The police mishandled this case. We already mentioned that. Treating Jill like a runaway, and they had lost valuable evidence. The state police lab and the sheriff department were never called to the crime scene. Do you think the police mishandled this case? Do you even think it's linked to the previous one? Jill was the only one to be shot. Spoiler. So do you think maybe it could have been a different killer? The only thing that kind of connects this to the previous one was she was clean and staged. Jill's father was extremely angry about the way that the police mishandled the investigation. A quote from him: "They won't respond to what they consider a runaway for 48 hours, but she wasn't a runaway. She was a kid who got angry, stomped her feet out of the house, and got picked up by a creep." A quote from Carol: "The hardest thing that when someone asks how many children I have and I automatically say 3. I can't believe that it's only 2. From her sister: "It's unbelievable to me that someone doesn't know something about her whereabouts from those days she was missing, because how can you just kill a 12-year-old in a very busy intersection and no one knows anything? How can that be?" Jill was not sexually violated, but she was held captive, and she was well fed and taken care of and had no ligature marks anywhere on her. Christine Mahalik was only 10 years old, of Berkeley, Michigan. She was born on April 25th, 1966. She was usually called Chris, so I might interchange between Chris and Christine when telling you about her. Chris was in Girl Scouts. She was learning to play the violin that her mother had just bought her for the previous year on her birthday. Chris was 4 feet tall and 8 inches, and she weighed only about 80 pounds. She had blue eyes with shoulder-length brown hair. On January 2nd, 1977, Chris's mother quotes, "Chris got bored, so she asked if she can go to the store to get a magazine. She wasn't usually allowed to cross the 12-mile road, but she had gone shopping for me earlier, so I gave in. I explained how to go, to wait for the light, and I told her to hurry. She promised." The clerk at the 7-Eleven confirmed that Chris made it there and bought her magazine. Christine failed to return home after about a half an hour, so Deborah, her mother, called the police. I remember so many times walking up to 7-Eleven growing up and knowing what, she was kidnapped and stuff. That's just, and I was her age too, walking alone or with my sisters, but either way, it's just scary. For the next 20 days, Deborah exhausted herself with worrying, pacing the floor, and managed to raise $17,000 in reward money for her daughter's return, which is about $83,000 in today's money. On January 22nd, 1977, a mail carrier, Jerome Wanzi, found Christine's body on the side of Bruce Lane, a dead-end rural road in Franklin Village. She was practically buried in the snow with only a hand sticking out. Jerome quickly hopped back in his mail truck and drove straight to the Franklin Police Department. Back then, there wasn't any cell phones, but don't you think that it would have been quicker, easier to knock on somebody's door? There was about 5 houses on that dead end or road. So, knock on somebody's door, ask to use their phone, have them call the police. I just feel like that would have been a little bit quicker than him driving. all the way, and then anyway. Chris was fully clothed, wearing a green blouse, gray striped jeans, a dark blue parka, and knee-high brown boots. She was carefully placed in the snow as if she was being carried, one arm under her head and the other was under her legs. The killer had closed her eyes and crossed her arms, then tucked her in the snow, patting it down and leaving handprints. Like the last two victims, her body and clothing was washed. It was likely the killer dressed her after. Deborah said that there was two things that Chris never did. Tie her blouse in the front, it was always in the back, and then she never tucked her pants into her boots, which when they found her, her pants were tucked into her boots. Chris's body was so badly frozen that the doctors had to wait till she thawed out before they could perform the autopsy. Christine had no signs of violence on her body, nor was she sexually violated. Oddly, Dr. Sillery, who did the examination, told a group of state crime labs technicians that he had found sperm both in her vagina and rectum, even though there was no evidence that she was violated, and he couldn't explain how they got there. Another pathologist and two state police lab techs were unable to detect any sperm, concluding that she had not been sexually violated. She had been smothered to death less than 24 hours earlier and her body laid within view of nearby homes. Christine was held captive for 19 days. Deborah told reporters, "Chris was a joy. This is why whoever took her and kept her for so long was enjoying her company. At least this is what we have told ourselves, and we prefer not to think of it any differently." Police now know that they have a serial child killer on their hands. They organized the largest manhunt in the U.S. history at the time. The differences between each case were different enough that they didn't connect them at the time until Timothy John King, born on July 9th, 1965 in Birmingham, Michigan. Tim was a good kid, outgoing, loved to play hockey and baseball, and he was the youngest of 4. He enjoyed riding a skateboard around the neighborhood and the parks where he played sports. Tim was a responsible young boy who rarely got into trouble. He even had a paper route. On the evening of March 16, 1977, Timothy rode a skateboard and headed to the corner store Hunter Maple Pharmacy to get some candy, since his sister Kathy had just given him 30 cents. As she was on her way out, she was going to visit either some friends, or I've also read it was possibly a boyfriend. Either way, she was on her way out, and Tim asked her if she could leave the door cracked so he could get back in. His older brother Christopher had a babysitting job that night, so he wasn't going to be home either. Neither was his brother Mark, who was rehearsing for a school play. His parents, Barry and Marion, were also out having dinner with a client from Barry's law firm. Tim was to be home alone by himself. When his parents returned home, the door was still ajar and Tim was nowhere to be found. An intensive search covering the entire Detroit area was conducted. Christopher, his older brother, had just received his driver's license the day before. He was armed with a baseball bat and searched for his little brother. The clerk at the Hunter Maple drugstore confirmed that The clerk at the Hunter Maples drugstore did confirm that Tim went in there and was able to buy his candy. His family offered a reward for him to turn home. Why am I about to cry? His family offered a reward with no turnout. They even wrote a letter to the abductor/killer pleading to release Timothy unharmed. His mother also pleaded in a letter for his safe return, stating, quote, "When Tim comes home, they would serve him his favorite Kentucky Fried Chicken." Tim was last seen wearing a red nylon jacket, a denim shirt, green trousers, and white tennis shoes with blue and red stripes. On the evening of March 22nd, 1977, 2 teenagers were driving and spotted something shallow in a ditch about 300 feet south of 8 Mile Road in Livonia. It was the body of Timothy King. He was posed with a skateboard placed next to his body. Wearing what he was last seen in, his clothes were neatly pressed and washed. His fingernails and toenails were scrubbed clean. He had been sexually violated with a foreign object. He also had rope burns on his wrist and ankles. He was suffocated approximately 6 hours earlier. His body was still warm to the touch. The autopsy showed that Timothy had eaten fried chicken earlier before he was murdered. Either A, the killer knew that his favorite food was Kentucky Fried Chicken. Maybe they saw that plead from his mother, or he asked him what his favorite food was. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments below which one do you think it was. Now talking about it more, I kind of think maybe the killer saw that his mother pleaded and was saying that his favorite food was Kentucky Fried Chicken. So that is why he got Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's my opinion. Let me know down in the comments below if you agree with me. A quote from Tim's father. "I'm convinced to this day that when Timmy was kidnapped, he knew what was going to happen to him. As an 11-year-old kid, there was nothing he could do about it. I can't imagine anybody doing what they were doing. And I can't imagine people not turning people in who do that. But I can't change society. We love him very much. He had a basketball game Saturday, and he missed practice today, Thursday. He's active in a school play. He's an achiever and a participator. We just loved him, and we want him to come home." His dad also made a personal plea to the Birmingham Police Department, and I'm going to read that quote for you. I don't know if you have children or if you want them. Please treat Tim the same way you would your own child. Talk to him. He's a talkative kid. I don't know if you have a brother or want one, but Kathy, Chris, and Mark said to treat him just as you would a brother. But we want him back. Please send him back. An eyewitness said they last saw Tim standing near a blue AMC Gremlin parked behind Catham's Supermarket on Maple Road in Birmingham on March 16, 1977. The suspect was said to be wearing a sports jacket with dark pants, and he was soft-spoken. At that time, every blue gremlin was to be stopped if it looked suspicious. The Fourth Amendment was suspended, meaning if you look suspicious driving a blue gremlin, you're getting stopped and searched. What a complete waste of time, money. One said, what a gross way to use resources. The King family always believed that the blue gremlin was a bad lead. The blue gremlin matter should have been thrown out. Basically, they didn't really get anything out of it. They went on a hiatus to try and find this blue gremlin, and to be honest, from all the research, it's not even like 100% confirmed that he was standing next to this gentleman that looked like the sketch. So we could be looking for this man. It didn't even look like him. The Oakland County Killer is not him. You know, it's alleged. It's so, and it all happened back then. There wasn't, you know, like CCTV or anything, so that's unfortunate. But technology advanced. In 2004, Marion, Tim's mother, passed away without knowing who killed her youngest son and never seeing justice. The most heartbreaking part of Tim's story. I mean, the whole thing is heartbreaking, but this also broke a little bit in my heart, you know. Tim painted a piece of wood that says, "Happy birthday, dear Dad, best wishes, Tim." Barry remembers Tim telling him that that gift was the best that he could do because Tim didn't have any money at the time. "I told my family," Barry tells the ABA Journal, "when I go to the crematorium, I want this to go back with me because I want to take Tim with me." Barry passed away at his home on November 19th in 2020 without getting justice for who killed his youngest son. December 1978, after spending its $2 million budget, in today's money, that would be $9,104,539. Michigan State Police took over the case and assigned one detective to the case, and that was it. There were no more murders connecting to the 4 victims after Timothy. Not connected, but possible. There were other abductions and murders around the Oakland County area within the same period. These are not specifically tied to the 4 victims due to the variations in the cases, but I wanted to kind of go over them. First, we have Kimberly Alice King. No relation to Timothy King, they just happen to have the same last name. She was a 12-year-old who disappeared from Warren on September 15th, 1979. So upon reading a little bit about Kimberly, she was staying the night at her friend's house, who was directly across from her grandparents' house. She snuck out to go use the payphone to call her sister. She might have wanted to go home or something. Regardless, her sister told her to go back inside. Upon searching the police were unsure of what payphone she actually used, so they're not really entirely sure, you know, where she was when she was abducted. But authorities did believe that she was abducted and that her disappearance is connected to the unsolved killings. We truly don't know if she is connected to the Oakland County Killer because her remains were never found. And I say that because we know that the victims were bathed, posed. We'll go more into all that in a little bit. Cynthia Ray Cadu. She was 16 years old from Roseville, Michigan. She was found bludgeoned to death on January 16, 1976 in Bloomfield Township. She was sexually violated. I don't think that she was necessarily a part of it, since it's not actually disproven or proven, but because she was sexually violated, both the other girls were not, and he only sexually violated the boys, so. And then we have Jane Louise Allen. She was 13 years old and found dead in a river in Miamisburg, Ohio on August 11, 1976, 4 days after she accepted a ride while hitchhiking in Royal Oak to visit her boyfriend in Auburn Hills. She had died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Her hands were tied behind her back with strips of a white t-shirt and no signs of being sexually violated. I kind of don't think that this one is, in my opinion, again, connected to the Oakland County Killers just because died of carbon monoxide poisoning. So I don't know. All the other ones were strangled. Granted, Joe was shot in the face, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think this one's connected? I couldn't really find too much information about her, so I feel it's hard to say. It really is. And then there is one that was alleged, but it was disproved. There's Sheila Schrock. She was 14. She was raped and shot dead while babysitting in Birmingham on January 20th, 1976. Her killer, Oliver Rose Andrews, had burglarized several homes in the neighborhood earlier that evening, and a neighbor was a witness while snow shoveling. Andrew was sentenced to life imprisonment. The Oakland County Special Task Force was created. The investigating officers noted the similarities in the crime, supported by the theories that the killings were done by a single killer or a small group of killers. All 4 victims were alone when they were abducted. They were also taken from business areas in or near parking lots. 2 victims were abducted on a Sunday afternoon, and the other 2 were on a Wednesday evening. All victims were held captive for periods of time ranging from 3 days to 19 days. All victims appeared to have been fed well while held and not subjected to weather or other exposures. All 4 victims were well cared for during their period of captivity, including caring of their normal biological needs. All their bodies were cleaned, and especially Tim King's body. His fingernails and his toenails were scraped, so they described him as being clinically clean. All 4 victims were dressed in their own clothing just before or after death. All 4 bodies were dumped along roadsides before they were found. There was no evidence of sexual violation in both girls, but in both boys, that showed obvious anal dilation. And then lastly, apparently little or no force was used in the abductions. There was no commotion ever reported. Nobody witnessed anything, so it must have been very trustworthy. And now they created a suspect profile. So they either assumed it was either one male or possibly 2 males involved. Caucasian, 20 to 30 years of age, being 5'8" to 5'10", 150 pounds to 175 pounds, with an athletic build. He'd be an above average education and above average intelligence. Has the ability to hold his victims for at least 19 days. Homosexual plus other mental problems. Has a compulsion for cleanliness to the point of being frantic. No substance abuse would be involved, and he'd be seeing a psychiatrist. He's super neat and clean and have a really clean house and car. They described it as a single dwelling with attached garage and cost about $30,000. I'd love to know how they get all that, but profilers. He would be acquainted with Oakland County and may work or live and socialize in the area. Has an employment situation which allows his freedom of movement. May have also altered his appearance, like wearing sunglasses, changing his hairstyle, simply putting a hat on, beard, no beard. And lastly, he wants the body found. There was a $100,000 reward in today's money that was equivalent to $489,782. So now we're going to go over some suspects and persons of interest. Keep in mind, remember, this is an unsolved case, so nobody was ever convicted of these murders, and everything is kind of alleged and circumstantial evidence linking him to the murder. So take what you want with a grain of salt, and it does get a little bit confusing, so kind of just hang with me. So let's go through these possible suspects. Some get ruled out and some are questionable if they could be the Oakland County Killer. One suspect was David Norberg. He was considered a suspect since he was employed at Warren at the time of Kimberly's disappearance in 1979, and he lived 2 streets away from her. In 1981, he was killed in an automobile accident near Recluse, Wyoming. After his death, jewelry allegedly belonging to several of the Oakland County child victims were found. In 1999, investigators traveled 1,200 miles to Recluse, Wyoming to exhume his body to collect DNA and hair samples, and they tried to match those to the ones found in Timothy King's body. They found a hair on Timothy's, it was up his nose. I forgot to mention that. So they found a hair, it was up in Timothy's nose, so now they're trying to connect that to David Norberg's. Norberg was never convicted of any of the murders. In 2002, authorities announced that the DNA did not match the hair found on Timothy, but Norberg is not yet ruled out as a suspect since he fits the killer profile and circumstantial evidence linking him to the murders. As the child killings took place in Michigan, the authorities considered the possibility that the infamous killer clown, John Wayne Gacy, was the Oakland County Child Killer. A witness had claimed to have seen the abduction of Timothy King. 2 men, one being described in his late 20s and the others described bearing a strong resemblance of John Wayne Gacy, who was allegedly in Michigan during the time of the killings. And in 2013, multiple DNA tests were done, and it was confirmed that John Wayne Gacy's DNA did not match any of the DNA found on the victim's body. He was not the Oakland County Killer. Now we have Alan. Alan's a complete waste of time. Like, police is a waste of time. In the following weeks after the death of Timothy King, Dr. Bruce Danton, a Detroit psychiatrist who was working with the task force in the case at the time, received a poorly spelled and guilt-ridden letter from an anonymous writer, only referred to as Alan, who claimed to be the sadomasochistic slave of his roommate Frank, who is believed to be the Oakland County Child Killer. Alan wrote a pleading, remorseful, and fearful letter about how he was losing his sanity, endangered, and developed unaliving thoughts, convincing Danton that the letter was genuine. According to Alan, he had accompanied Frank on many road trips seeking out boys, but he claimed that he wasn't present during the abductions for the boys that Frank murdered. He also confirmed that Frank drove a AMC Gremlin, but he got rid of it in Ohio and it was never seen again. Alan also stated in the letter that Frank was traumatized from the experience of killing children during the Vietnam War, which he and Alan served, and he was seeking revenge against most affluent citizens, including the residents of Birmingham. He also wrote that Frank wanted to see rich people suffer for sending forces to Vietnam and not getting nothing in return. Alan had instructed Danton to respond to the letter by printing code words like "Weather Bureau says trees to blossom in 3 weeks," published in the Sunday's Free Press edition. Soon after, Dr. Danton received a phone call from Alan in which he offered to provide photographic evidence in exchange for a letter. William Milliken, the governor of Michigan at the time, which granted him immunity from being prosecuted. Danton arranged the meeting at a bar known as the Pony Cart Bar, which was near Detroit's Palmer Wood neighborhood. However, Alan never showed up at the venue and he was never seen again. It is possible that these cases are connected to what is going on Fox Island. That's a whole nother story. Gonna have to do a video on that. But from the small research, Gerald Jerry Richards would take his special students, I'm assuming maybe ones he thought that was attractive, as gross as that is, because these boys were 10 to 13, give or take. Like between 10 and 13. He would take them to his island, Fox Island, where there was a rule if you were on the beach, you were to be naked. Some boys questioned it and stuff, but they were told that this is what you do, and they were so trusting of his gym teacher, so they just believed it. That's how it was supposed to be, so they just did it, and they didn't really question it too much. Some boys did hear some screams of stop and pain, but I digress, and we're going to get back to the actual Oakland County Child Killer, because there's survivors in that, and it was heavy. The Oakland Child County Killer case has received over 2,000 tips, 500,000 pages of documentations, thousands of interviews, and hundreds of pieces of evidence. I personally read a 141 page, actually I've read more than that, there was multiple, I will have them linked below, autopsies, crime scenes, like narrative reports. So in this one I'm going to speak about next. I read a 141 page narrative report with leads developed by the Livonia Police, investigated by the Livonia Police, Michigan State Police, and the FBI. In 2005, the case was reopened when Richard McCrae Lawson was extradited from California for killing Xavier Giller in Livonia, Michigan in 1989. If you didn't catch last week's, sort of last week's, but if you didn't catch the last true crime coverage, what is with Michigan and California? John Norman Collins was trying to get extradited from Michigan to California for killing a murder over there, and now we're trying to get him from California. Like, it's just, stay in your own state. Lawson was arraigned for the first-degree murder and armed robbery, which is another one I'm probably going to have to do a story on, because it is alleged that he is a cross-country crime spree, but he did provide valuable information regarding the Oakland County Child Killer. Lawson had a CCH, which is a computerized criminal history for arson, and a charge for a CSC1, which means that he is guilty of a criminal sexual conduct in the first degree with a child under the age of 13. He has 5 counts and 5 different kids in Warren, Michigan, and assault for beating his father near death with a hammer. So, he's a real bag of Skittles. He is serving life in prison for murdering his boss, which was Xavier Giller in Livonia in 1989. Side note, because if we would have done something about this then, would he be... Anyway, he probably wouldn't have been able to do some of the things, maybe a lot of the things. So, he was arrested in 1946 for performing oral on a young boy and paid him 10 cents. He did this to 4 others. Their ages were 6 to 9. I don't know, I get the smile. I think I'm just, because of this next part, it pisses me off. He only received 2 years probation and court costs. Yeah, he learned his lesson real well right there. In 2005, according to Richard Lawson's ex-girlfriend, Faye, although they didn't have a physical relationship because Faye said Lawson was only interested in young boys. Faye also told investigators that Lawson had a close group of 4 friends who were a part of some sort of group to live out and interact their deepest, darkest fantasies with boys as young as 9 years old. Back at their homes, in their motel rooms, even in their neighborhood bike shops and greasy basement. As long as all men played the rules, they said they wouldn't get caught. The men were Robert Neil Schuler, Robert H. Moore, Jim Tippett, and Ted Orr. Faye said that Richard, Bob Moore, and Bob Schuler used to take the boys up to Ted's apartment to have a boys' night out. Faye says she knew about the boys, and she would even do a lot of the cooking for them, as these disgusting men would have their way with these boys. Do you think maybe they were all in it, have their way and live out their dark fantasies with these boys, but Faye would feed them and wash them because she cared for them and didn't know how else to help? Maybe she felt trapped, like maybe she was getting threatened. It doesn't explain the girls though, unless maybe she specifically wanted them, like as like a daughter. Maybe she couldn't have kids, and this is all alleged in a theory I'm literally just coming up with, like when I was researching. But I was just curious if they were a part of this group. Why didn't she say anything? I didn't read anywhere in that 141-page document why she didn't say anything. You see your boyfriend bringing home young boys, doing their way with them. You really think that young boy wants to be there? You never, I don't know. I felt like she could have done something. Even if these aren't connected to the Oakland County Child Killer, like killings, I feel like she could have done something for these boys that went through the horrific experience that they did with Lawson and his group. Lawson claimed that there may be other victims not connected yet to the other murders. Lawson said one evening he was at Bob Moore's apartment with Ted Orr, and Bob Moore had a photo album laying on this coffee table. Lawson claimed that Ted Orr opened up the album to a page and asked Bob Moore if that looked like the King Kid. Bob Moore died of cardiac arrest in his home in 1996. His pit bulls ate him. They devoured his carcass before his body was discovered. Good. He deserved it, if everything is true, and he was alleged, like, you know, yeah. Robert Neil Schuler had a CSC-1, a child under 13, on his criminal record from 1992. He died on August 1st in 2022. There was no Ted Orr anywhere in Detroit. Turns out that wasn't even his name. His name was Ted Lamborghini. In 2005, during a 3-hour interview with Ted Lamborghini, he admitted his involvements with Lawson, Tippett, Moore, and Schuler, but stated that he had nothing to do with the Oakland County child killings. He agreed to take a polygraph test. The questions were as followed, and then I'm going to read these directly. Number 1. In 1976 through 1977 in Oakland County, did you participate in killing any of those kids? He replied, no. Number 2. Were you present when any of those kids were killed? He replied, no. Number 3. Did anyone tell you they killed any of these kids in Oakland County? He answered no. Number 4. Did you see anyone kill any of these kids in 1976 through 1977 in Oakland County? He replied no. I'm probably going to butcher this name, and I am so sorry. But Lieutenant Robert Dykstra had been a polygraph examiner for 10 years, and Lieutenant Ernie Maee of the Michigan State Police has been conducting polygraphs for 18 years. Both were convinced that Lamborghini was withholding information in these crimes. When notified that he failed, he was never outraged or tried denying it, saying that the test was wrong, listening with only his head in his hands as he failed, only asked where Robert Lawson was at, not knowing that he was already in custody. The failed polygraph test led to a search and siege of his apartment in Ohio. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. Like, he moved to Ohio near like the Cleveland area. They were to seize any child predator memorabilia, but none was found. Although it didn't seem that if he actually lived there, he had brand new furniture, new clothing, but there was no food in the fridge nor the freezer, and he only had a few small family pictures. There was no boxes or closets full and no computer to search. On November 21st in 2005, the task force received a call from the FBI DNA lab in Quantico, Virginia. All 4 subjects submitted for DNA comparison to the hair on Timothy King came back with negative results. None of those 4 were connected to Timothy King. On April 20th in 2007, Ted Lamborghini is sentenced with a 3-life sentence for multiple 30-year-old child molestations that were put together against him over a course of 2.5-year investigation of the men in their boys' night out. 2 victims of Lamborghini read statements on record in the courtroom stating that they know based on what Ted and his associates did to him while violating him in Royal Oak, Michigan in the 1970s that he is the Oakland County Child Killer. The legend, okay? The other victims stated how Ted and his associates would forcibly sodomize him while pushing his face into the cushions. He said that he couldn't breathe and he thought he was going to die that day, stating further that he was gasping for air and help. Ted, who was seated in the chair next to him, watching, and just smiled at him and told him that nobody loves him or nobody ever will, and that if he ever told anybody, he would make him disappear like so many others. He also talked about how Ted would forcibly put him into a bathtub and wash him after and then feed him. Ted Lamergine pled guilty to all 15 counts, including 3 life felonies involving young boys, rather than accepting a plea bargain. Lamergine would have been required to take another polygraph test on the Oakland County child killings, so he pled guilty. Although he got life in prison, he would have received life in prison if convicted for being the Oakland County child killer. I don't think it mattered if he really confessed or not to him, because he knew he was already caught. I mean, he was gonna serve his life sentence. He's not going anywhere. So to him, if he did do the Oakland County child killings, it didn't matter if he was convicted or not. He's already, you know. Watching him in the court trials, though, you guys, he definitely seems creepy, if you catch what I'm throwing down. After sentencing, the judge, Judge Jeanette Barry, said to Ted, "That's what they do to people like you in prison. May God have mercy on your soul. You are a classic predator. You don't look like a monster. You preyed upon our most valuable." The family of Mark Stebbins filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Lamergine seeking $25,000. The lawsuit alleges the Lamergine abducted Stebbins and held him captive in a Royal Oak house for 4 days in February 1976 before smothering him to death during a sexual assault. He is never charged nor linked to the death of Stebbins. Side note about Lamergine, he was kicked out of the Navy for having homosexual activities. And now we have Christopher Bush. He is a known pedophile in the Oakland County area, the son of a General Motors executive, the vice president. Christopher was arrested and convicted for several accounts of sexually assaulting children. Christopher was found shot in his bedroom, allegedly unaliving himself. In his bedroom on the wall was a pencil drawing. A drawing of a young boy screaming. I don't know about you guys, but it does look a lot like Mark Stebbins. I said that even before, like, they showed a picture of it, and I said that looks like Mark, and then they went into, like, the document, and then Mike, Mark's brother, quotes, "When I first saw that, that looks exactly like my brother being sodomized." Which, I was like at first, buddy, I mean, how do you know what it looks like for him to be, you know what I mean? But if you're looking at the picture, you can clearly see that this boy is in pain. He's screaming out. You could see the pain in his eyes. I digress. Investigators found no gunshot residue on Christopher, nor did they find blood spatter. They did find 4 shell casings in his bedroom, and he was wrapped neatly under his sheets. Granted, he was a child predator, but you're telling me he unalived himself without any gunshot residue, no blood, let alone he shot himself 4 times, and he was wrapped under the sheets? That something just really doesn't make any sense there. I don't know what type of cover-up was going on there, what happened, but I don't think he did it to himself. I did find this part interesting. A former judge said the only person who can determine if a person is guilty or innocent is a judge or a jury upon a complaint that is brought in a court of law. I legally cannot do that. The people wanted a retired judge to say that, yes, Christopher is guilty. And she's saying legally I cannot do that, even if she did think that he was, but she's not an actual judge in front of the judge law. You know what I mean? Makes sense? I just found it was interesting because people want to put the blame on somebody without actual evidence. And so, yeah. In 2012, law enforcement sent numerous items to the FBI in Quantico, Virginia for testing. It included 3 hairs, 1 from Mark Stebbins' clothing, another from Timothy King's underwear, and a 3rd from King's nose during the autopsy. Since the DNA was held until DNA testing was available, the DNA testing was deteriorating. If you know, I mean, DNA doesn't last forever, so it was deteriorating. Forensic scientists had to use mitochondrial DNA testing, which identifies the DNA strain of a mother, but it cannot distinguish siblings who share the same. All 3 hairs that were tested matched the mitochondrial DNA hairs collected from a 1966 Pontiac Bonneville car, who was a person of interest in the case, Archibald Edward Sloan. A first breakthrough that linked at least 2 of the children's murders to each other. Sloan is currently serving life in prison after conviction on 2 counts of first-degree sexual assault against minors, but his DNA doesn't match the samples tested by the FBI. According to the Oakland County Chief Assistant Prosecutor Paul Walton said, it doesn't mean that he didn't do it, but whoever those hairs belong to is obviously a person of interest. Investigators can now look into anyone Stallone was associated with and who would borrow his vehicle back in the 1970s. Specifically, authorities are looking for anyone who has information about these people Stallone spent time with at the time of these crimes took place, and who else besides Stallone might have been driving the car in question. Anyone with information is asked to call 1-833-784-9425. I honestly don't know if that line's still active, but you know, if you have information, report it. All 4 cases are still unsolved to this day, and from Mr. King, when he was alive, it was, I think this article is from like 2019. But I quote, "My family's not confident about it, but I feel even worse not knowing the answer. Is the fact that people who looked over after 40 years won't talk about it." Going back a little bit, because I guess I wasn't sure where to add this, but I want to read it anyway. December 1978, after spending its $2 million budget, which in today's money would be $9,104,539, Michigan State Police took over the case and assigned 1 detective to the case, and that was it. So many mistakes have been made in each of these cases. The system failed all of the children, and a killer, if still alive, has lived in our midst for decades, possibly killing others. Let me know what you guys think of this case coverage. Do you think both Lawson and Lamborghini worked together and they were both the Oakland County Child Killers? Or do you think it was just Lawson that was the killer and pinned it on Lamborghini? Do you think it was neither? I mean, do you think maybe it was actually all 4 of them, and then since the other 2 died, there was only the 2 part left? Like, do you think Christopher had anything to do with it? I don't know. Let me know all your thoughts and opinions down in the comments. I absolutely love chatting with you guys. We can, you know, maybe work some other theories up or something. Let me know down in the comments. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, because it helps me out tremendously, pushes it out to the YouTube algorithm. Maybe more people could see this video and possibly come up with some new theories, or they have any information and would like to share it. If you enjoy true crime case coverages or me, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that little notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads. Until next case coverage, stay safe and hug your loved ones extra close tonight. Bye, guys.